So yeah, we took a little bit of a segue to do a bit of a detour and review the thoughts not only of this new character that Quan introduced us to over the past 2 weeks, Osho, but also a very interesting poet from India whose name I now forget. Quan, who was the original 14th century poet?
Kabir.
Kabir. Yes, who we should definitely read more of even in time. I think that there is a lot of material in a lot of great big concepts condensed in his poetic words. So that's definitely something to revisit. And since we're still staying on the path of the not only Asian philosophical matrix and the yearning of the finite for the infinite and the material domain and how it relates to the immaterial metaphysical domain and the role of poetry, creativity, love, morality, empathy, all of these things that really should feed both the great scientist, the great statesman, as well as the great artist. Tagore has been our guide for a little while now. We've done the first 5 chapters, and now we're going to jump back into chapter 6. We may not finish this whole book necessarily, though we might. Definitely not tonight. I just mean in the longer scheme of things. And Jerry would like to read it. Quan, is there anything that you thought we should have in mind going back into Tagore after the segue?
No, not now. I think that we can discuss with the reading.
Okay, great.
Okay, chapter 6, the vision. I hope that my readers have understood, as they have read these pages, that I am neither a scholar nor a philosopher. They should not expect from me fruits gathered from a wide field of studies or wealth brought by a mind trained in the difficult exploration of knowledge. Fortunately for me, the subject of religion gains in interest and value by the experience of the individuals who earnestly believe in its truth. This is my apology for offering a part of the story of my life, which has always realized its religion through a process of growth, and not by the help of inheritance or importation. Man has made the entire geography of the earth his own, ignoring the boundaries of climate. For, unlike the lion and the reindeer, he has the power to create his special skin and temperature, including his unscrupulous power of borrowing the skins of the indigenous inhabitants and misappropriating their fats. His kingdom is also continually extending in time through a great surplus in his power of memory, to which is linked his immense facility of borrowing the treasure of the past from all quarters of the world. He dwells in a universe of history, in an environment of continuous remembrance. The animal occupies time only through the multiplication of its own race, but man through the memorials of his mind, raised along the pilgrimage of progress. The stupendousness of his knowledge and wisdom is due to their roots spreading into and drawing sap from the far-reaching area of history. Man has his other dwelling place in the realm of inner realization, in the element of an immaterial value. This is a world where, from the subterranean soil of his mind, his consciousness often, like a seed, unexpectedly sends up sprouts into the heart of a luminous freedom, and the individual is made to realize his truth in the universal man. I hope it may prove of interest if I give an account of my own personal experience of a sudden spiritual outburst from within me, which is like the underground current of a perennial stream unexpectedly welling up on the surface. I was born in a family which, at that time, was earnestly developing a monotheistic religion based upon the philosophy of the Upanishad. Somehow, my mind at first remained coldly aloof, absolutely uninfluenced by any religion whatsoever. It was through an idiosyncrasy of my temperament that I refused to accept any religious teaching merely because people in my surroundings believed it to be true. I could not persuade myself to imagine that I had a religion because everybody whom I might trust believed in its value. Thus, my mind was brought up in an atmosphere of freedom from the dominance of any creed that had its sanction in the definite authority of some scripture, or in the teaching of some organized body of worshipers. And therefore, the man who questions me has every right to distrust my vision and reject my testimony. In such a case, the authority of some particular book venerated by a large number of men may have greater weight than the assertion of an individual, and therefore I never claim any right to preach. When I look back upon those days, it seems to me that unconsciously I followed the path of my Vedic ancestors and was inspired by the tropical sky with its suggestion of an uttermost beyond. The wonder of the gathering clouds hanging heavy with the unshed rain, of the sudden sweep of storms arousing vehement gestures along the line of coconut trees, the fierce loneliness of the blazing summer noon, the silent sunrise behind the dewy veil of autumn morning, kept my mind with the intimacy of a pervasive companionship. Then came my initiation ceremony of Brahmanhood, when the Gayatri verse of meditation was given to me, whose meaning, according to the explanation I had, runs as follows.
Matt, turn the page.
Let me contemplate the adorable splendor of him who created the earth, the air, and the starry spheres, and sends the power of comprehension within our minds. This produced a sense of serene exaltation in me. The daily meditation upon the infinite being, which unites in one stream of creation my mind and the outer world. Though today I find no difficulty in realizing this being as an infinite personality in whom the subject and object are perfectly reconciled, at that time the idea to me was vague. Therefore, the current of feeling that it aroused in my mind was indefinite, like the circulation of air, an atmosphere which needed a definite world to complete itself and satisfy me. For it is evident that my religion is a poet's religion, and neither that of an orthodox man of piety, nor that of a theologian. Its touch comes to me through the same unseen and trackless channel as does the inspiration of my songs. my religious life has followed the same mysterious line of growth as had my poetical life. Somehow they are wedded to each other. And though the betrothal had a long period of ceremony, it was kept secret to me. When I was 18, a sudden spring breeze of religious experience for the first time came to my life and passed away, leaving in my memory a direct message of spiritual reality. One day, while I stood watching at early dawn the sun sending out its rays from behind the trees, I suddenly felt as if some ancient mist had in a moment lifted from my sight, and the morning light on the face of the world revealed an inner radiance of joy. The invisible screen of the commonplace was removed from all things and all men, and their ultimate significance was intensified in my mind. And this is the definition of beauty. That which was memorable in this experience was its human message. The sudden expansion of my consciousness in the super-personal world of being. The poem I wrote on the first day of my surprise was named The Awakening of the Waterfall. The waterfall, whose spirit lay dormant in its ice-bound isolation, was touched by the sun, and bursting in a cataract of freedom, it found its finality in an unending sacrifice, in a continual union with the sea. After 4 days, the vision passed away, and the lid hung down upon my inner sight. In the dark, the world once again put on its disguise of the obscurity of an ordinary fact. When I grew older and was employed in a responsible work in some villages, I took my place in a neighborhood where the current of time ran slow, and joys and sorrows had their simple and elemental shades and lights. The day which had its special significance for me came with all its drifting trivialities of the commonplace life. The ordinary work of my morning had come to its close, and before going to take my bath, I stood for a moment at my window, overlooking a marketplace on the bank of a dry riverbed, welcoming the first flood of rain along its channel. Suddenly, I became conscious of a stirring of soul within me. My world of experience in a moment seemed to become lighted, and facts that were detached and dim found a great unity of meaning. The feeling which I had was like that which a man groping through a fog without knowing his destination might feel when he suddenly discovers that he stands before his own house. I still remember the day in my childhood when I was made to struggle across my lessons in a first primer, strewn with isolated words smothered under the burden of spelling. The morning hour appeared to me like a once illumined page, grown dusty and faded, discolored into irrelevant marks, smudges, and gaps, wearisome in its moth-eaten meaninglessness. Suddenly, I came to a rhymed sentence of combined words, which may be translated thus: "It rains, the leaves tremble." At once I came to a world wherein I recovered my full meaning. My mind touched the creative realm of expression, and at that moment I was no longer a mere student, with his mind muffled by spelling lessons and closed by classroom. The rhythmic picture of the tremulous leaves beaten by the rain opened before my mind the world which does not merely carry information, but a harmony with my being. The unmeaning fragments lost their individual isolation, and my mind reveled in the unity of a vision. In a similar manner, on that morning in the village, the facts of my life suddenly appeared to me in a luminous unity of truth. All things that had seemed like vagrant waves were revealed to my mind in relation to a boundless sea. I felt sure that some being who comprehended me and my world was seeking his best expression in all my experiences, uniting them into an ever-widening individuality, which is a spiritual work of art. To this being I was responsible, for the creation in me is his as well as mine. It may be that it was the same creative mind that is shaping the universe to its eternal idea. But in me as a person, it had one of its special centers of a personal relationship growing into a deepening consciousness. I had my sorrows that left their memory in a long burning track across my days. But I felt at that moment that in them I lent myself to a travail of creation that ever exceeded my own personal bounds, like stars which in their individual fire bursts are lighting the history of the universe. It gave me a great joy to feel in my life detachment at the idea of a mystery of a meeting of the two in a creative comradeship. I felt that I had found my religion at last, the religion of man, in which the infinite became defined in humanity and came close to me so as to need my love and cooperation. This idea of mine found at a later date its expression in some of my poems addressed to what I called Jivan Devada, the Lord of my life. Fully aware of my awkwardness in dealing with a foreign language, with some hesitation, I give a translation, being sure that any evidence revealed through the self-recording instrument of poetry is more authentic than answers extorted through conscious questionings. Thou who art the innermost spirit of my being, art thou pleased, Lord of my life? For I gave to thee my cup, filled with all the pain and delight that the crushed grapes of my heart had surrendered. I wove with the rhythm of colors and songs the cover for thy bed, and with the molten gold of my desires I fashioned playthings for thy passing hours. I know not why thou chosest me for thy partner, Lord of my life. Didst thou store my days and nights, my deeds and dreams for the alchemy of thy art, and string in the chain of thy music my songs of autumn and spring, and gather the flowers from my mature moments for thy crown? I see thine eyes gazing at the dark of my heart, Lord of my life. I wonder if my failures and wrongs are forgiven. For many were my days without service, and nights of forgetfulness. Futile were the flowers that faded in the shade, not offered to thee. Often the tired strings of my lute slackened at the strain of thy tunes. And often, at the ruin of wasted hours, my desolate evenings were filled with tears. But have my days come to their end at last, Lord of my life, while my arms round thee grow limp, my kisses losing their truth? Then break up the meeting of this languid day. Renew the old in me in fresh forms of delight, and let the wedding come once again in a new ceremony of life. You will understand this, how unconsciously I had been traveling toward the realization which I stumbled upon in an idle moment on a day in July, when morning clouds thickened on the eastern horizon and a caressing shadow lay on the tremulous bamboo branches, while an excited group of village boys were noisily dragging from the bank an old fishing boat. And I cannot tell how at that moment an unexpected train of thoughts ran across my mind, like a strange caravan carrying the wealth of an unknown kingdom. From my infancy, I had a keen sensitiveness which kept my mind tingling with consciousness of the world around me, natural and human. We had a small garden attached to our house. It was a fairyland to me, where miracles of beauty were of everyday occurrence. Almost every morning in the early hour of the dusk, I would run out from my bed in a great hurry to greet the first pink flush of the dawn through the shivering branches of the palm trees, which stood in a line along the garden boundary, while the grass glistened as the dewdrops caught the earliest tremor of the morning breeze. The sky seemed to bring to me the call of a personal companionship, and all my heart, my whole body, in fact, used to drink in at a draught of the overflowing light and peace of those silent hours. I was anxious never to miss a single morning, because each one was precious to me, more precious than gold to the miser. I am certain that I felt a larger meaning of my own self when the barrier vanished between me and what was beyond myself. I have been blessed with that sense of wonder which gives a child his right of entry into the treasure house of mystery in the depth of existence. My studies in the school I neglected because they rudely dismembered me from the context of the world, and I felt miserable, like a caged rabbit in a biological institute. This perhaps will explain the meaning of my religion. This world was living to me, intimately close to my life, permeated by a subtle touch of kinship, which enhanced the value of my own being. It is true that this world also has its impersonal aspect of truth, which is pursued by the man of impersonal science. The father has his personal relationship with his son, but as a doctor, he may detach the fact of a son from that relationship and let the child become an abstraction to him, only a living body with its physiological functions. It cannot be said that if through the constant pursuit of his vocations he altogether discards the personal element in his relation to his son, he reaches a greater truth as a doctor than he does as a father. The scientific knowledge of his son is information about a fact and not the realization of a truth. In his intimate feeling for his son, he touches an ultimate truth, the truth of relationship, the truth of a harmony in the universe, the fundamental principle of creation. It is not merely the number of protons and electrons which represent the truth of an elephant. It is the mystery of its relationship which cannot be analyzed. We are made conscious of this truth of relationship immediately within us in our love, in our joy. And from this experience of ours, we have the right to say that the Supreme One, who relates all things, comprehends the universe, is all love. The love that is the highest truth, being the most perfect relationship. I still remember the shock of repulsion I received as a child when some medical student brought to me a piece of a human windpipe and tried to excite my admiration for its structure. He tried to convince me that it was the source of the beautiful human voice. But I could not bear the artisan to occupy the throne that was for the artist, who concealed the machinery and revealed the creation in its ineffable unity. God does not care to keep exposed the record of his power, written in geological inscriptions, but he is proudly glad of the expression of beauty which he spreads on the green grass, in the flowers, in the play of the colors on the clouds, in the murmuring music of running water. I had a vague notion as to who or what it was that touched my heart's chords. Like the infant, which does not know its mother's name or who or what she is. The feeling which I always had was a deep satisfaction of personality that flowed into my nature through living channels of communication from all sides. I am afraid that the scientist may remind me that to lose sight of the distinction between life and non-life, the human and the non-human, is a sign of the primitive mind. While admitting it, let me hope that it is not an utter condemnation, but rather the contrary. It may be a true instinct of science itself, an instinctive logic, which makes the primitive mind think that humanity has become possible as a fact only because of a universal human truth which has harmony with its reason, with its will. In the details of our universe, there are some differences that may be described as non-human, but not in their essence. The bones are different from the muscles, but they are organically one in the body. Our feeling of joy, our imagination, realizes a profound organic unity with the universe, comprehended by the human mind. Without minimizing the differences that are in detailed manifestations, there is nothing wrong in trusting the mind, which is occasionally made intensely conscious of an all-pervading personality answering to the personality of man. The details of reality must be studied in their differences by science, but it can never know the character of the grand unity of relationship pervading it, which can only be realized immediately by the human spirit. And therefore, it is the primal imagination of man, the imagination which is fresh and immediate in its experiences, that exclaims in a poet's verse, wisdom and spirit of the universe, thou soul that art the eternity of thought, and gifts to forms and images of breath and everlasting motion. And in another poet's word, it speaks of that light whose smile kindles the universe, that beauty in which all things work and move. The theologian may follow the scientist and shake his head and say that all that I have written is pantheism. But let us not indulge in an idolatry of name and dethrone living truth in its favor. When I say that I am a man, it is implied by that word that there is such a thing as a general idea of man, which persistently manifests itself in every particular human being who is different from all other individuals. If we lazily label such a belief as pananthropy and divert our thoughts from its mysteriousness by such a title, it does not help us much. Let me assert my faith by saying that this world, consisting of what we call animate and inanimate things, has found its culmination in man, its best expression. Man, as a creation, represents the Creator. And this is why, of all creatures, it has been possible for him to comprehend this world in his knowledge and in his feeling and in his imagination, to realize in his individual spirit a union with a spirit that is everywhere. There is an illustration that I have made use of in which I supposed that a stranger from some other planet has paid a visit to our Earth and happens to hear the sound of a human voice on the gramophone. All that is obvious to him and most seemingly active is the revolving disc. He is unable to discover the personal truth that lies behind, and so might accept the impersonal scientific fact of the disc as final, the fact that could be touched and measured. He would wonder how it could be possible for a machine to speak to the soul. Then, if in pursuing the mystery, he should suddenly come to the heart of the music through a meeting with the composer, he would at once understand the meaning of that music as a personal communication. That which merely gives us information can be explained in terms of measurement, but that which gives us joy cannot be explained by the facts of a mere grouping of atoms and molecules. Somewhere in the arrangement of this world, there seems to be a great concern about giving us delight, which shows that in the universe, over and above the meaning of matter and forces, there is a message conveyed through the magic touch of personality. This touch cannot be analyzed. It can only be felt. We cannot prove it any more than the man from the other planet could prove to the satisfaction of his fellows the personality which remained invisible, but which, through the machinery, spoke direct to the heart. Is it merely because the rose is round and pink that it gives me more satisfaction than the gold which could buy me the necessities of life or any number of slaves. One may, at the outset, deny the truth that a rose gives more delight than a piece of gold. But such an objector must remember that I am not speaking of artificial values. If we had to cross a desert whose sand was made of gold, then the cruel glitter of these dead particles would become a terror for us. And the sight of a rose would bring to us the music of paradise. The final meaning of the delight which we find in a rose can never be in the roundness of its petals, just as the final meaning of the joy of music cannot be in a gramophone disc. Somehow we feel that through a rose, the language of love reached our heart. Do we not carry a rose to our beloved because in it is already embodied a message which, unlike our language of words, cannot be analyzed? Through this gift of a rose, we utilize a universal language of joy for our own purposes of expression. Fortunately for me, a collection of old lyrical poems composed by the poets of the Vaishnava sect came to my hand when I was young. I became aware of some underlying idea deep in the obvious meaning of those love poems. I felt the joy of an explorer who suddenly discovers the key to the language lying hidden in the hieroglyphs, which are beautiful in themselves. I was sure that these poets were speaking about the supreme lover, whose touch we experience in all our relations of love. The love of nature's beauty, of the animal, the child, the comrade, the beloved, the love that illuminates our consciousness of reality. They sang of a love that ever flows through numerous obstacles between men and man the divine. The eternal relation, which has the relationship of mutual dependence for a fulfillment that needs perfect union of individuals and the universal. The Vaishnava poet sings of the lover who has his flute, which, with its different stops, gives out the varied notes of beauty and love that are in our nature and man. These notes bring to us our message of invitation. They eternally urge us to come out from the seclusion of our self-centered life into the realm of love and truth. Are we deaf by nature? Or is it that we have been deafened by the claims of the world, of self-seeking, by the clamorous noise of the marketplace? We miss the voice of the lover, and we fight, we rob, we exploit the weak, we chuckle at our cleverness when we can appropriate for our use what is due to others. We make our lives a desert by turning away from our world that stream of love which pours down from the blue sky and wells up from the bosom of the earth. In the region of nature, by unlocking the secret doors of the workshop department, one may come to that dark hall where dwells the mechanic and help to attain usefulness. But through it, one can never attain finality. Here is the storehouse of innumerable facts, and however necessary they may be, they have not the treasure of fulfillment in them. But the hall of union is there, where dwells the lover in the heart of existence. When a man reaches it, he at once realizes that he has come to truth, to immortality. And he is glad with a gladness which is an end, and yet which has no end. Mere information about facts, mere discovery of power, belongs to the outside and not to the inner soul of things. Gladness is the one criterion of truth, and we know when we have touched truth by the music it gives, by the joy of greeting it sends forth to the truth in us. That is the true foundation of all religions. It is not as ether waves that we receive light. The morning does not wait for some scientist for its introduction to us. In the same way, we touch the infinite reality immediately within us only when we perceive the pure truth of love or goodness, not through the explanations of theologians, not through the erudite discussion of ethical doctrines. I have already made the confession that my religion is a poet's religion. All that I feel about it is from vision and not from knowledge. Frankly, I acknowledge that I cannot satisfactorily answer any questions about evil or about what happens after death. Nevertheless, I am sure that there have come moments in my own experience when my soul has touched the infinite and has become intensely conscious of it through the illumination of joy. It has been said in our Upanishad that our mind and our words come away baffled from the supreme truth. But he who knows truth through the immediate joy of his own soul is saved from all doubts and fears. In the night, we stumble over things and become acutely conscious of their individual separateness. But the day reveals the greater unity which embraces them. The man whose inner vision is bathed in an illumination of his consciousness at once realizes the spiritual unity reigning supreme over all differences. His mind no longer awkwardly stumbles over individual facts of separateness in the human world, accepting them as final. He realizes that peace is in the inner harmony which dwells in truth and not in any outer adjustments. He knows that beauty carries an eternal assurance of our spiritual relationship to reality, which waits for its perfection in the response of our love.
That's really beautiful. That's great. Yeah, you really see the essence of Schiller and Shelley. Shelley's In Defense of Poetry, I just found was really cut from the same cloth as this writing here. So many of the same ideas are expressed.
Yeah, it's the poet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's not a big fan of factoids. That really comes through. Which should be useful for today, where every time you watch TV, they're talking about you have to listen to the science, and then you listen to the facts, and it's all dumb numbers. There's no poetry anymore.
No, yeah. There's such an object fixation in this, like if you approach things from this reductionist science that we're all told we have to use to try to make sense of things in general, the world becomes just this sort of dead world of objects floating around with forces pulling and pushing within empty space. Not like you don't see or you don't have access to an idea of harmony and relationship, because harmony and relationship are more than just it transcends the particular objects that you're looking at, whether planets, right, or the atoms in our body. There's a quantity of them. They have a relationship to each other. But if you just think of the solar system or a body as the sum of its parts materially, you lose all the beauty. You lose all of this mystery, right? Because you could always probe ever more into what makes it all cohere, and you can get somewhere, but you'll never have the full answer in a closed way. You could always know it better and more imperfectly. Less imperfectly, which is sort of Tagore's theme as a scientist, and also sort of to what Max Planck, remember just a few months ago, we were reading Max Planck's philosophy of physics, and he's also talking about the need to assume if you're going to make a discovery in the universe, it means you have to tune your own mind into the essence of that universe. And thus we have to assume some coherence between the individual mind, the personality, even not the logical computer part, the personality of the scientist inquiring, and the mind of the universe of God as a whole. And you have to have some idea of the relationship of that infinite divine and this finite, essence in order to make any progress. And he's like, I couldn't have made any of the discoveries that I provably made in the quantum world if I didn't have that sense already there. So it's so interesting. And he's a pianist, a poet.
I like that one part. He says, I can't explain evil or what happens after death.
Yeah.
This is what religion is. He really doesn't like the theologians either, who are fixated on little technical aspects.
Mm-hmm. Like so many people spend so much energy thinking about the structure and pleasure of the afterlife or fear of the afterlife. They walk in guilt or in anticipation for being in either heaven or hell, and they don't spend enough time thinking about, well, you're alive. Like, what's that about? Why are you skipping that step?
It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And also in all of this, he doesn't really refer to any particular religion, but religion in general, like the unity of religion.
Right. Well, that's a good point too, and that's sort of the theme of the whole book. Right? But a lot of people who have sort of gotten this sense that their religion is under attack politically by forces that want to erase our relationship to these broader institutions, the family, the nation, religion, that connect us to something greater than ourselves. They got a sense of that increasingly with recent events. That's I think amplified how many people are becoming aware of that. But then there's still this tendency to think, well, it's my personal religion which is under attack, and it's like, well, not really. I mean, yes and no. There's something embedded across monotheistic, especially as he points out, right, religions as a whole, that all seem to have common characteristics that he's going through that is tied to this poetic or creative spirit. It's not the formal structure of the thing that makes it such a dangerous thing to empires, but it's this deeper creative quality. And I just love how he's very autobiographical, talking about how he resisted and was repulsed by formal religions. He would never, as a kid, just simply adopt something because people who he respected were saying you should. But it started really coming to him as this, I don't even want to put it into words, right? We all just read it. But it came through this poetic, creative yearning. Which shows you the problem with like bad poetry as well, right? Because a lot of the 20th century has been really misshapen by nihilistic poetry that has no real classical expression to it. It's all just very much based on expressing your subjective feelings with no goal, no intelligibility. And there's so many varieties that just sort of destroy its power to connect you to something higher in a lawful way.
He uses, stories of his life, not to talk about himself,
mm-hmm.
but to talk about ideas, which is the opposite of today's poetry. They talk about themselves so that they can talk about themselves because they're in love with themselves and not about any particular idea.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great article that Adam wrote.
Adam Sedia?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Walt Whitman. Oh, it just reminds me of that.
Mm-hmm. Right. What was his that Whitman poem on like the daffodils or something? Was it the daffodils or some image in nature? And it uses a lot of flowery, pretty form. But then when you ask the deeper question of like, well, what is he setting up as irony or contrast in the imagery that he is choosing as a poet? What's that higher idea he's trying to communicate? It's really just daffodils. Like it's not that is and how he feels about daffodils. He was not trying to get you to use that as a device to leap you into a higher realm. He actually thought you shouldn't do that. He thought that was bad poetry if you make that attempt.
Yes, there was no metaphor involved.
Yeah. Symbolism is okay. Metaphor from that standpoint is bad.
Interesting to read some of his actual poetry too.
I think that's not a bad idea at all. We could do a future comparative poetry reading and discussion session. That's a great idea. Hey, Kevin. Okay, well, Kevin just showed up, but I guess he's busy. What do you guys want to do? Do we want to still pause and chat about this chapter we just read, or do we want to squeeze in chapter 7? I don't know if it's long or short.
If someone else would like to read, I think I'm losing my voice.
Juan, you want to read?
Yeah, why not? No, it's not a long chapter. I'll just check.
Okay.
Okay.
I got some words.
The man.
Sorry. Okay.
You said? What did you say?
I just said we've got some Wordsworth spliced in. So anyway, doesn't matter.
Okay. All right. So the man of my heart, chapter 7. At the outburst of an experience which is unusual, such as happened to me in the beginning of my youth, the puzzled mind seeks explanation in some settled foundation of that which is usual, trying to adjust an unexpected inner message to an organized belief, which goes by the general name of a religion. And therefore, I naturally was glad at the time of youth to accept from my father the post of secretary to a special section of the monotheistic church of which he was the leader. I took part in its services mainly by composing hymns, which unconsciously took the many-thumb impression of the orthodox mind, a composite smudge of tradition. Urged by my sense of duty, I strenuously persuaded myself to think that my new mental attitude was in harmony with that of the members of our association, although I constantly stumbled upon obstacles and felt constraints that hurt me to the quick. At last, I came to discover that in my conduct, I was not strictly loyal to my religion, but only to the religious institution. That latter represented an artificial average with its standard of truth at its static minimum. Jealous of any vital growth that exceeded its limit, I have my conviction that in religion and also in the arts, what is common to a group is not important. Indeed, very often it is a contagion of mutual imitation. After a long struggle with the feeling that I was using a mask to hide the living face of truth, I gave up my connection with our church. About this time, one day I chanced to hear a song from a beggar belonging to a Baal sect of Bengal. We have in the modern Indian religion deities of different names, forms, and mythology, some Vedic and others Aboriginal. They have their special sectarian idioms and associations that give emotional satisfaction to those who are accustomed to their hypnotic influences. Some of them may have their aesthetic value to me, and others philosophical significance overcumbered by exuberant distraction of legendary myths. But what struck me in this simple song was a religious expression that was neither grossly concrete, full of crude details, nor metaphysical in its rarefied transcendentalism. At the same time, it was alive with an emotional sincerity. It spoke of an intense yearning of the heart for the divine which is in man and not in the temple or scriptures or in images and symbols. The worshipper addresses his songs to man, the ideal. He says, temples and mosques obstruct thy path, and I fail to hear thy call or to move when the teachers and priests angrily crowd round me. He does not follow any tradition of ceremony, but only believes in love. According to him, love is the magic stone that transmutes by its touch greed into sacrifice. He goes on to say, for the sake of this love, heaven longs to become earth and gods to become man. Since then, I have often tried to meet these people and sought to understand them through their songs, which are their only form of worship.
Are these
One is
extracts? Are those
yes, from the
extracts from the Bengali poem?
from the group called the Balls of Bengal, and it's a group quite old and exactly described by Tagore. So since then, I have often tried to meet these people and sought to understand them through their songs, which are their only form of worship. One is often surprised to find in many of these verses a striking originality of sentiment and diction. For, at their best, they are spontaneously individual in their expressions. One such song is a hymn to the ever young. It exclaims, "O my flower buds, we worship the young." For the young is the source of the holy Ganges of life. From the young flows the supreme bliss. And it says, we never offer ripe corn in the service of the young, nor fruit, nor seed, but only the lotus bud, which is our own mind. The young hour of the day, the morning, is our time for the worship of Him, from whose contemplation has sprung the universe. It calls the spirit of the young the Brahma Kamal, the infinite lotus. For it is something which has perfection in its heart and yet ever grows and unfolds its petals. There have been men in India who never wrote learned texts about the religion of man, but had an overpowering desire and practical training for its attainment. They bore in their life the testimony of their intimacy with the person who is in all persons, of man, the formless, in the individual forms of man. Rajab, a poet saint of medieval India, says of man, God man, Narayana, is thy definition. It is not a delusion but truth. In thee, the infinite seeks the finite. The perfect knowledge seeks love. And when the form and the formless, the individual and the universal, are united, love is fulfilled in devotion. Ravidas, another poet of the same age, sings, Thou seest me, O divine man, Narahari, and I see thee, and our love becomes mutual. Of this God man, a village poet of Bengal says, He is within us, an unfathomable reality. We know him when we unlock our own self and meet in a true love with all others. A brother poet of his says, Man seeks the man in me, and I lose myself and run out. And another singer sings of the ideal man and says, How could the scripture know the meaning of the Lord who has his play in the world of human forms? Listen, O brother man, declares Chandidas. The truth of man is the highest truth. There is no other truth above it. All these are proofs of a direct perception of humanity as an objective truth that rouses a profound feeling of longing and love. This is very unlike what we find in the intellectual count of humanity, which is like a body that has tragically lost itself in the purgatory of shadows. Wordsworth says, we live by admiration, hope, and love. And ever as these are well and wisely fixed, in dignity of being we ascend. It is for this dignity of being that we aspire through the expansion of our consciousness in the great reality of man to which we belong. We realize it through admiration and love. through hope that soars beyond the actual, beyond our own span of life into an endless time wherein we live the life of all man. This is the infinite perspective of human personality where man finds his religion. Science may include in its sphere of knowledge the starry world and the world beyond it. Philosophy may try to find some universal principle which is at the root of all things, but religions inevitably concentrates itself on humanity, which illuminates our reason, inspires our wisdom, stimulates our love, claims our intelligent service. There's an impersonal idea which we call law, discoverable by an impersonal logic in its pursuit of the fathomless depth of the hydrogen atom, and by the distant virgin worlds clothed in eddying fire. But as the physiology of our beloved is not our beloved, so this impersonal law is not our God, the Pitritama Pitrinam, the Father who is ultimate in all fathers and mothers. Of him we cannot say, Tat vidi paranipatina pariprasena sevaya. Realize him by obeisance, but the desire to know by service. For this can only be relevant to the God who is God and man at the same time. And if this faith to be blamed for being anthropomorphic, then man is to be blamed to be man for being man, and the lover for loving his dear one as a person instead of a principle of psychology. We can never go beyond man in all that we know and feel, and a mendicant singer of Bengal has said, our world is as it is in our comprehension, the thought and existence are commingled. Everything would be lost in unconsciousness if man were not. And when response comes to your own call, you know the meaning of reality. According to him, what we call nature is not a philosophical abstraction, not cosmos, but what is revealed to man as nature. In fact, it is included in himself, and therefore there is a commingling of his mind with it, and in that he finds his own being. He's truly a lesson in humanity if he cannot take it within him and through it feel the fullness of his own existence. His art and literature are constantly giving expression to this intimate communion of man with his world, and the Vedic poet exclaims in his hymn to the sun, Thou who nourished the earth, who workest alone, O sun, withdraw thy rays, reveal thy exceeding beauty to me, and let me realize that the person who is there is the one who I am. It is for us to realize the person who is in the heart of the all by the emancipated consciousness of our own personality. We know that the highest mission of science is to find the universe enveloped by the human comprehension, to see man's Vishvarupa, his great mental body that touches the extreme verge of time and space, that includes the whole world within itself. The original Aryans who came to India for their gods, the deities of rain, wind, fire, the cosmic forces, which singularly enough found no definite shapes in images. A time came when it was recognized that individually they had no separate, unrelated power of their own, but there was one infinite source of power, which was named Brahma. The cosmic divinity developed into an impersonal idea. What was physical grew into a metaphysical abstraction. Even as in modern science, matter vanishes into mathematics. And Brahma, according to those Indians, could neither be apprehended by mind nor described by words, even as matter in its ultimate analysis proves to be. However satisfactory this idea might be as the unknowable principle relating to itself or the phenomena that are non-personal, it left the personal man in the void of negation. It cannot be gainsaid that we can never realize things in this world from inside. We can but know how they appear to us. In fact, in all knowledge, we know our own self in its condition of knowledge. And religion sought the highest values of man's existence in this self, for this is the only truth of which he is immediately conscious from within. And he said, Purushana para kinshit, sa kashta sa para gati. Nothing is greater than the person. He is the supreme, he is the ultimate goal. It is a village poet of East Bengal who preaches in a song the philosophical doctrine that the universe has its reality in its relation to the person, which I translate in the following lines. The sky and the earth are born of my own eyes. Hardness and softness, the cold and the heat are the products of my own body. The sweet smell and the bad are of my own nostrils. This poet sings of the eternal person within him, coming out and appearing before his eyes, just as the Vedic Rishi speaks of the person who is in him, dwelling also in the heart of the sun. I have seen the vision of mine own revealing itself, coming out from within me. In India, there are those whose endeavor is to merge completely their personal self in an impersonal entity, which is without any quality or definition, to reach a condition wherein mind becomes perfectly blank, losing all its activities. Those who can claim the right to speak about it say that it is the purest state of consciousness. It is own joy and without our own any object or content. This is considered to be the ultimate end of yoga, the cont of union, thus completely to identify one's being with the infinite being who is beyond all thoughts and words. Being who is beyond all thoughts and words. Such realization of transcendental consciousness, accompanied by a perfect sense of bliss, is a time-honored tradition in our country, carrying in it the positive evidence which cannot deny by any negative argument of refutation. Without disputing its truth, I maintain that it may be valuable as a great psychological experience, but all the same, it is not religion. Even as the knowledge of the ultimate state of the atom is of no use to an artist who deals in images in which atoms have taken forms. A certain condition of vacuum is needed for studying the state of things in its original purity, And the same may be said for the human spirit. But the original state is not necessarily the perfect state. The concrete form is a more perfect manifestation than the atom, and man is more perfect as a man than where he vanishes in an original indefiniteness. This is why the Ishopanishad says, or Ishopanishad says, truth is both finite and infinite at the same time. It moves and yet moves not. It is in the distant, also near. It is within all objects and without them. This means that perfection as the ideal is immovable, but in its aspect of the real, it constantly grows toward completion. It moves. And I say of the Supreme Man that he is infinite in his essence and he is finite in his manifestation in us, the individuals. As the Ishopanishad declares, a man must live his full term of life and work without greed, and thus realize himself in the being who is in all beings. This means that he must reveal in his own personality the Supreme Person by his disinterested activities.
Hey, Kwan, what is the Ishopanishad? How is that related to the Upanishads?
Okay, the Isha Upanishad is one of the 108 standard Upanishad because you have many Upanishad. The Upanishad is the, okay, first word by word Upanishad means at the feet of the master. Okay, but here you have to understand that the feet of the master is the feet of flesh of any particular man having realized a supreme enlightenment. But first and foremost, the divine man who is eternal and infinite. So any man, the past and the future, expressing spontaneously the deep relation in his finite form and the infinite, produce an Upanishad, okay? Either that Upanishad is recorded for history or not. On a lower intellectual level, there are 108 recognized traditional Upanishad in India. And Isha or Isho Upanishad, Tagore here chose the form Isho, but it can say Isha, I-S-H-A-2, Isha Upanishad. And he say Isho Upanishad because there were two volumes and he didn't want to have two volumes together. Is the Upanishad called the envelope of the Lord because the name Isha means the Lord. Okay, so it's the is the song of the Lord, if you want, and it's the shortest Upanishad of the 108 traditional ones because it can be written on a page, but it's extremely dense and it's poetry at its best. Okay, it's poetry. Okay, because poetry integrates creativity, and once again, an Upanishad is the spontaneous creativity of someone living his finite form in union with the infinite.
Do you think that you could assemble maybe a few selections from the Upanishads that we could read soon, maybe even next week or the week after, to flesh out some more?
Sure. Well, if you're not uncomfortable with the fact that I would use a lot of Osho material because he explained a lot of Upanishad, and you have here one of the most important Upanishad, the Katha Upanishad, Dialogue with the Lord of Death. And we don't need to read everything, of course, but I like it because I think the subtitle is absolutely cool. Dialogue with the Lord of Death. So, but you have other, of course. And the Isha Upanishad could be interesting, but I would say that if we decide to read it one day, we should give 1 or 2 sessions to it, because even if the written words can be put on one page, uh, the discussion, the emotional reaction, the philosophical understanding will take 1 or 2 sessions. It would be a waste, I think, to use the Isha Upanishad only as a filling material for 15 or 20 minutes. I think you're on mute, Matt.
Oh, I just said okay. Let's keep that on the agenda then. I like that.
And I would like that. I'm quite happy having the opportunity to read that chapter, "The Man of My Heart," because as they said in the Zen teaching at the beginning of the practice or of your journey of the soul, mountains are mountain. At the middle of the journey, mountains are no longer mountains, and at the end of the journey, mountain are mountains. Okay, and what he said in his text is very interesting, because yes, of course, it's part of the journey of the soul then to experience the infinite Brahma, the pure consciousness with no automatic mental activities. Okay, and here I am quite unhappy with one of his word, which is the a blank in the mind. How unfortunate choice of word, because it gives the impression that if you go on the journey of the soul, you would become a little bit stupid. Okay, and the one of the sad and tragic misunderstanding of those things is to believe that the mind is something to be suppressed. On the contrary, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which is the first line of the Yoga Sutra by Patanjali, has to be understood deeply. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Union with pure consciousness will be the cause of the cessation of automatic mental activities. Okay? Chitta, automatic mental activity. Vritti, automatic modifications. So what the union with pure consciousness, or what the energy of your universal self will give you, is not the destruction of your mind. On the contrary, you will be the master of your mind. Okay, because the mind, the intellect, okay, the VIP, if we return to the lower trigram, the lower trigram and the upper trigram are not only a trigram to describe an ideal society, but also a psycho and a personal psychocosmogram, meaning that in the VIP, in the lower trigram, the vitality, the intellect, and the psyche or the heart mind, your capability to express yourself with languages, with symbols, with metaphors, and so on is the intellect. The problem with the intellect is that the intellect is a very bad master, but an excellent servant. So Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha is precisely to bring the master, the upper trigram, into existence, or to educare, to bring forth within the master, because the master is beauty, goodness, and truth. And when the master, beauty, goodness, and truth is present, the intellect is a perfect instrument. But the intellect is a very bad servant, very bad master, I'm sorry, when the master is absent. So in those two perfect chapters that we were reading tonight, I have only one reservation, and that reservation is precisely for the word blank. But that's a small thing.
And this was in regards to where did he use the word blank? Was it in this chapter?
Yes, in the chapter I read, but and it's I can find it quite easily because it's in the section where he's saying that in this country, meaning India, we have people claiming to have experienced the absolute pure consciousness,
Oh,
and
at the
in
very
which
end.
yeah, well, in the
Here.
at the beginning of the end, yeah,
Yeah.
and that that pure experience of pure consciousness would bring on a blank state of the mind. That was a truly unfortunate choice of word, but I gave my blah blah to explain the
Oh, I see.
nuance.
Okay, it was right there.
And as long as so it's the Indian way to say the bring on truth, goodness, and beauty. Okay, and when he says that for the that is very good, but it's not perfection, because perfection is precisely not to live at this for a human being, not to live at the state where mountains are no mountains, but to live at the state precisely where mountains are mountains. But after having brought forth the master, pure consciousness, which is the middle of the journey, where you experience mountains as not mountain, but the supreme for a human being is to experience mountains as mountains. And a little bit, if you want, in the allegory of the cave, when the guy going out to the sun of the absolute would go back inside the cave, okay, which is the end of his journey. And when he saw the son of the absolute, was not the end of his journey, but the middle of his journey.
Mm-hmm. I was reminded a little bit of the dispute that we had encountered. I mean, Cynthia went through it really well in her class on Leibniz versus Clarke, but this whole idea of, you know, if we're going to allow for God, a creator, into our worldview, and thus it implies also our relationship to said creator, the question then becomes, is the creator something we conceptualize as existing entirely within the universe, that the physical world itself is God, as this sort of like mundana type of concept, or I guess that sort of dovetails pantheism, like Tagore was sort of saying, you might accuse me of pantheism, but it's not just that. Or is it something which is purely transcendental of the physical world, that God is purely outside of the world that God created and not within it? And then Leibniz's whole line of battle is, well, you're posing the question fallaciously. It's not one, it's not like either or. It's you shouldn't just assume it's one or the other, that you're limited to, but an element of both is true, that God is both everywhere within the universe, but also not limited to the boundary conditions of the universe itself as a material thing either. So don't be an Aristotelian. Don't pick finite or infinite. Something could be both finite and infinite at the same time, under the condition that you yourself are thinking in a certain type of way and acting accordingly as well.
Absolutely. And the Chinese in me cannot resist to show you again this image.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you have the finite, the infinite, and the circle that would bring both together.
Yeah, people always miss the circle.
Exactly. Exactly, exactly. And the people who thought that disappearing in the blind is the supreme just move from the black to the white and forgot to be a living being. Maybe intellectually, because I need to speak with words. Okay, if I open my mouth, it means that I am expressing some intellectual content. So when we say something by words, we are a little bound by the rules of word, because words is a production functioning on thesis and antithesis. I would say that a refined language would try to introduce as often as possible the third element, which is the synthesis, because often we speak by the dance between thesis and antithesis, and the dance is not only thesis and antithesis, but is also synthesis, and that synthesis is not only on one plane. It's like a spiral. It goes up and up and up and up, and that is precisely the Brahman. Okay, because Brahman means expansion, or maybe a nicer infinite. And if we still have to use words, it's a discussion on the psychocosmogram, okay, meaning the journey of the soul with the harmony cosmos inside us, and that cosmos inside us will bring us to the cosmos outside us. So the cosmos inside us would be precisely the experience of that pure awareness, okay, and in which the intellect is not becoming blind once again, but the intellect is now operating, because the intellect is truly a machine. So to say that the intellect is operating is not wrong, on the contrary, because the intellect is a word and concept spinning machine. A spinning machine precisely gave rise to absurdity like cybernetics and so on, if the master is absent.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking about the relationship of what you were just describing, and I love how you ended it with cybernetics as the problem, like an expression of what happens when you let go of the master and you just allow the
servant,
the servant to run the show. And there's this similar to the, just like in the case of the yin yang symbol, what's often left out is the quality of the circle, the bounded quality of the circle itself as an idea, right? It's not just this homogeneous blah of light and darkness, good and evil in an unformed way. There's a boundary to it that you can wrap the mind around, but it's also tied to the infinite. And Kuza, from the Christian sort of matrix, had this wonderful example that I think everyone here knows about, but it's just in the context of what's being said is just so great, of the polygon inside of a circle, which is constantly increasing its sides, always approximating ever more closely the circle, which Kuza uses as a metaphor for the intellect, and the circle being truth in its divine sense, and how the intellect, it could always know more information, which is kind of like, as we know more information, it's kind of like adding more sides to from the octagon to the 16agon, from the 16agon to the 32agon, for on and on and on, right? And it seems as though we're always getting closer and closer in terms of area to that circle. But the reality is, if you define the circle as being that which has the least, that shape that has an area with the least amount of sides to it, if that's how you define it, then every time your polygon increases its sides, it's being further removed in quality from the circle. Although in quantity, the pure quantitative area is coming closer. So you have both a coming closer and coming further at the same time, which can only be resolved if you get out of the simple intellect and into a higher synthesis. Then you can resolve that problem.
Absolutely.
And that's the cybernetics, right? The information theory people, the artificial intelligence ideology that comes out of cybernetics. It's all based on the idea that we could just get the computers to process faster, and at a certain point, they will replace the human intellect. Because,
Exactly.
it's not creative.
Exactly. Well, those people unhappily don't have truth, goodness, and beauty in them.
No.
And when Tagore, I don't remember if it's in this chapter or the chapter just before, when he was speaking of the theologians imitating the scientists, meaning intellectual considerations, okay, about the supreme, okay. I would say there's two sciences that are quite laughable on Earth. One is the economy, except Lyndon LaRouche, of course. But Lyndon LaRouche is another kind of economy for me. It's not economy. It's ultimate philosophy. And economy is one laughable supposed science of human beings, and the other one is theology. Okay, because it's using the intellect to speak about God, which is completely laughable. But I would say that you have some good theological productions, because those are the people living in truth, goodness, and beauty, and they shine forth those values using words, okay, because they don't have a choice. Okay, either you compose a piece of music, either you make a painting like Leonardo da Vinci, or either you make something sublime in architecture like Brunelleschi in Firenze, or you write a poem, or you write something, okay? But you can see very clearly the things that have been produced or created when the guy was in the space of truth, goodness, and beauty, and when the guy was simply spinning its wording and conceptual machine, the intellect.
Mm-hmm.
And you were very right, speaking of the new poetry, which are not poetry at all, but nightmarish production from the intellect. And we can see it very easily.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So he was speaking of that because he was very modest, okay? And and it's a good thing that a true man is modest. But what we understand that there is a hierarchy, okay? The intellect is the VIP, is the second term, the second item of the lower trigram, okay? And the poet is in the upper trigram, okay? Either a philosopher, king, an aristocrat, or a timocrat. I would say that at least an aristocratic man in the Platonic sense. Okay, so he was very modest by saying simply that intellect is laughable in certain endeavors.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why the chapter name is The Man of My Heart.
Yeah. Yeah, this idea of love and admiration, whereby true hope can properly have fertile soil, is also very good that he's emphasizing that a lot. He's weaving that into his line of thinking, because that's the basis upon which we ascend. And how the idea, because love is a very there's no like common term that everyone can agree on the nature of true love. But I love this resonance to this particular song that has in a lyric, love is the magic stone that transmutes by its touch greed into sacrifice. For the sake of this love, heaven longs to become earth and gods to become men, which kind of like reverses the way we usually think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have some talent for music, Matt, you should compose some musical things on those lines, and it will be perfect. Because that's it. Okay, and I would lower the discussion a little bit by saying that sacrifice is etymologically, it means sacer fecit. Okay, it's from Latin, sacrifice, sacer fecit, and sacer fecit is means to the sacred. Okay, so love is the magic stone that transmutes by its touch greed into the creation of the sacred.
Yeah, it's good.
And that creation of the sacred is the core, not duty, but is the core reality of the God man. When I said that man is probably can be the best defined as the animal craving after beauty or obsessed by beauty. Why? Because man wants to become a God man, meaning capable to create sacredness. Because beauty is the reflection of the divine on earth. And we are naturally attracted to that. Obsessively attracted to beauty.
Well, it's that old saying, even the person who goes into the brothel is looking for God. They just don't know it. But you have everybody who is either on the right, like a higher path, or on the wrong path. We're all still yearning for it, and it expresses itself sometimes in ugly ways. But that's because we're ignorant to our true self. Like Socrates says, you should really examine yourself. Like that's the purpose. Philosophy isn't about knowing about things outside of you. It's about knowing yourself and then being able to contemplate the relationship between the harmony of your inner world and the outer world that you can tune. But people who are not aware of that or never had access to that can easily fall prey to other paths where their identities become misshapen around an overemphasis on the finite sensual, expression of themselves, to detriment to the health of their immaterial souls. But they still yearn for things that are beautiful, though destroy them ultimately, or destroy their potential to access their true self over time. Well, the next chapter, 8, is going to be called The Music Maker. I don't know about you guys. I really would like to read that and see his thoughts on music. Maybe we could then transition into, and it's a short one too. So we could probably do 2, and then the artist, as chapter 9 next week. We'll do these 2, 8 and 9. And then see if after that we want to shift gears into an examination of the Upanishad selections, or whether we want to continue on. Let's revisit this next week. I am Man's Nature.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. All right, guys. So always a special part of the week. Thank you all for taking the time and sharing the ideas, and thank you, Kwan.
Thank you.
See you soon. Ciao.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey,